everyone. Welcome back to our classes. If you're new to our channel, I just want to introduce ourselves. My name is Yvette, and I'm here with my spiritual teacher, Susan. And these classes are part of a series. So if you enjoy this video, I suggest watching the previous ones. We've been doing these for over a few months. But as always, I hope you enjoy our class today about the inner child.
Hi. This class is called Healing the Inner Child and Adolescent, and it also, next week, I'm going to teach the class on healing past life personalities, and it also has a lot to do with that as well, because you heal past life personalities in almost the same way that you heal your child and adolescent. Yvette said this is a series of classes, and this is class 10. And all the classes have built on each other. So I'll be using terminology that I've used and defined before. I want to say that this class on healing the inner child and adolescent is the most important class you will ever hear. It is the most important information about healing yourself. And I'm not just talking about healing emotionally and spiritually, but also physically. And that is because all disease is created out of childhood trauma. I mean, that's a huge statement to make, but it's absolutely true. I don't know if you have heard of the ACE study. Have you heard of the ACE study, Yvette?
I don't think so.
So ACE, ACE stands for Adverse Child Events or Adverse Child Experience. I can't remember which one. And several years ago, Kaiser decided to do a study and they gave 17,000 people who came to their hospital a questionnaire. And the questionnaire had questions on it about their childhood. Now, how many times have you ever gone to a doctor and have they asked you about your childhood?
Never.
Never. And so they began asking questions. Let's see, I have it in my notes about physical, emotional, sexual abuse. Come from a single parent family? Was there any traumas that occurred in the home? Domestic violence, racism? Have you ever been the butt of racism? Have you ever experienced a catastrophe like a flood or that kind of thing? Have you ever been in a war? So they ask you all these things related to the traumas that every human being experiences in childhood. And what they discovered was, and then they tallied it up. So you answered the questions, and then they kind of tallied it up. How many adverse events did you have? Was it the only adverse event that you had was that your parents divorced? Or was there domestic violence too? Was there sexual abuse? Was there physical abuse? Was there drug and alcohol addiction? So they tallied all these up. And the more ACEs you had, the more likely that you were going to have one or more diseases in adulthood.
Mm.
So what they discovered was that there's a direct correlation between the amount of childhood trauma that you had and what happens to you physically later on in life. So there's all those categories of abuse that I just talked about, but I believe that there's also something new that we need to add on to this, which is food abuse,
Mhm.
because now it is possible to feed a child the worst possible food that isn't even real food for their entire childhood. And if you do that, you change their DNA, you set up habits that are really health destroying. If you feed a child lots and lots of sugary sweets, they develop this sweet tooth. They can't get over it as an adult. It becomes another addiction. I believe there's also something that I think of as religious abuse. From these classes, you have figured out that I have a radically different view of reality than most religions have. Although there's a lot of crossover. There's a lot of things I do believe that are the same as other religions, but there's a lot of things that I don't. And I think that the things that are taught to children that are not true, in my opinion, of course, are abusive. And well, you experienced some of that. And
Yeah.
Tell us what it was like growing up in a Catholic school.
It's very confusing, especially because I always knew that it didn't really resonate with me, and especially because I do think that some parts of going to church are good. However, I think that when, there's people that go because they think that it will solve all their issues and, basically like they get wiped clean of all of their sins just because they entered a church. Or,
Mhm,
they don't teach you that, like for me, I didn't feel like I was connected to God until I started my spiritual journey and I started having a connection with myself. And I
right.
feel like there's church doesn't tell you that.
Mhm,
I think that it's almost impossible to have a relationship with God if you don't have a good relationship with your own self, because
mhm,
it's very connected. And that was a big thing for me that church never taught me. And it was just a bunch of stories that didn't make sense to me as a kid, and it didn't really give me an idea of who God is and what he stands for and, what I should actually be believing and how
mhm,
I
mhm,
should implement that in my lifestyle and in the way that I talk to myself and the way that I take care of myself as a vessel of God.
mhm,
They don't teach
mhm,
you that though, and that was a big thing that.
right.
Mm,
And of course, we're just talking about, the Catholic experience that you had, and there's all kinds of churches, and other churches do a better job than that.
yeah,
But by and large, they leave out so many pieces of the puzzle, not because they're bad or wrong, they just don't know. Without all those pieces of the puzzle, I think we have something called belief system abuse, actually, where people are taught all the wrong things.
yeah.
And we grow up believing certain things that just absolutely are not true, but we act upon them
Mhm,
anyway. And that's why these classes are about, looking at your unconscious beliefs, healing your belief system, shifting out of victim consciousness and into higher consciousness. And a lot of religions are really steeped in victim consciousness. And
mhm,
we have to get past that as a humanity if we are going to evolve and actually heal ourselves.
mhm,
So, and see that all of us had a dysfunctional childhood. All of us experienced abuse at some level. And I'm going to be talking to you today about some of the emotional abuses I received. I talked about my mother before, and I'm going to be talking to you about that. And I have to say that I had decent parents. My parents didn't drink alcohol, they didn't do any drugs, they were just regular people. My dad was an elementary school teacher. Went to work every day, he brought home the paycheck. I wasn't sexually abused, I wasn't ever hit, but the emotional abuse I received devastated me. And
mhm,
then I became a psychotherapist and started to talk to people who were severely abused sexually in ways that blew me away,
mhm,
and physically as well. And I realized, well, I have nothing to complain about. But
mhm,
even so, that abuse devastated me.
yeah,
And a lot of the clients I had, I don't even know how they survived their childhood. It was so horrendous. And so
mhm,
what I'm trying to say is if what happened to me was devastating, and I had decent parents who no drugs, alcohol, nothing like that, then what is it like for people who have drug or alcohol addicted parents? What's it like for people who are physically or sexually abused? It's almost like something I can't even conceive of.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and everybody takes trauma differently, and, like, for example, one thing that may be really traumatic for somebody, another person could get over that or, heal from that very quickly, or it depends on the person and depends on the situation and, like, childhood, how they grew up, and like for me, I grew up with an alcoholic parent. To me, that was just normal. I didn't know that. I thought every dad did that, like so I'd go to my friend's house and be like, "Oh, your dad's gonna drink juice or water? Like he's not gonna have a beer?" Or, it wasn't to me, I wasn't like I didn't think of it as trauma growing up. I thought of it as, "Oh, that's just what dads do."
Hmm, hmm.
So, in a way, almost like when children are, sexually abused, they don't it's almost like I feel like they don't know that they don't know that something's wrong with that because they don't have anything to compare it to.
Right. That's
Mm,
true.
yeah.
That's absolutely true. But we all have trauma. And you know, I've talked enough to know that I know that you had trauma as well, based upon what happened to you in your childhood. And so the point is, in order to heal physically and psychologically, in order to be mentally healthy, we have to heal that trauma. We can't just shove it under the carpet.
Mhm.
We can't just pretend like it didn't exist. We can't just affirmation it away.
Mhm.
We have to feel, we have to express, and then we have to process that
Mhm.
trauma. But the problem is, if we do it as the adult self we are, if you go to talk therapy, generally what will happen is you'll tell your therapist about what happened. That's not going to heal it,
Mhm. Yeah.
unfortunately.
Mhm.
You have to re-feel that trauma.
Mhm.
You have to express that trauma as the child that you were,
Mhm.
and then you have to process it in order to let it go. All those things have to happen.
Mhm.
And no one's been taught how to do that. Even psychotherapists haven't been taught this information. Although psychotherapists, if you have a really good psychotherapist, you can do some profound healing. But all too often, it takes years and years.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, I've had clients that come to me that have already had 10 years of psychotherapy. And it's like, you're still struggling with this? You
Mhm.
know, yeah, a lot of psychotherapists don't know how to deal with it. However, I do have to say I've been a psychotherapist 20 years, and the field is making great advances in figuring out how to deal with PTSD and child trauma and all those things. So maybe I'm not all up on the latest,
Mhm.
but that has been my experience. So when we die, the body falls away, but our thoughts and feelings go with us. Goes right back to that first class that I taught. And we take our consciousness with us into what's called the fourth dimension, where people in our dimension, we live in the third of length, width, and depth set within a backdrop of time. And this is the dimension that we are conscious in. But when we die, we leave this body and go into what's called the fourth dimension. And because it has a different frequency than the third, we can't see that dimension. They can't see us. And so it's like we're in two separate realities. A lot of people call it the afterlife. And the afterlife has 7 different levels or densities. Depending on what your belief system in this lifetime is, will determine where you vibrate or what density that you will be drawn to in the afterlife.
Mhm.
So you can be drawn to, you can have a really, really low vibration and be drawn to through magnetic attraction, the first or second density, which is kind of a hell-like place, or you can be drawn to the seventh density, which is very, very heaven-like.
Mhm.
And so it's all dependent on your frequency when you die. And when you die with unhealed trauma, now, if you have trauma in childhood and you haven't healed it, felt it, expressed it, and processed it, and gotten it out of your energy field, that trauma will create a frequency in your vibration that never goes away, even though you may not be conscious of it on a daily basis. So we've talked before about the negative ego, and we've talked about the shadow in other classes. And what happens when we get triggered, you know what I mean by the word triggered,
Mhm.
emotionally triggered by something, emotionally upset by something, something happens in your life that triggers you, and for some reason you can't just let it roll off your back. You're thinking about it, you're processing it for days, you're thinking about that person, you're projecting on that person. Well, that event was something that reminds you of what happened to you in your childhood,
Mhm.
some kind of traumatic experience that happened to you in your childhood. And even though you might try to process it out logically and rationally as an adult, oh, don't feel that way, just stop stressing about it, etc., that never works. Because eventually, it might work in the short run, but eventually something else will come along to re-trigger you.
Mhm. Yeah.
So you can't fully process it out until you go back to the child who experienced that thing, because it's the child that in you, and your child never dies. Let's get that straight. Your
Mhm.
child never dies. I'm 70 years old. I still have a child. An inner child is what we call it. And when I'm talking about the inner child, we're talking about that started part of you that is still emotionally immature and does not yet see a bigger picture. And of course, all these classes are about helping you to see a picture that you were never told about while you were growing up. That part of you never dies. And that part of you has good aspects. There's the magical child, there's the adaptive child, there's the whimsical child, the child that's full of imagination, the inner brat that is just irrational and wants what it wants now. I mean, there's all these aspects to the child, and then there's the traumatized child.
Mm,
And so when I'm talking about the inner child, especially in context of this class, it's I'm going to be talking about the traumatized child because it's that traumatized child that needs to be healed. And it's not just the child I'm talking about. It's the child at any age from infancy. We can even, there are people who in hypnotherapy can go back to their birth or even before
mm,
and understand that they weren't wanted as an infant, that things that went wrong during the pregnancy, they can recount all of that if they've got a good hypnotherapist. So we're
mm,
not just talking about the infant or a 2-year old or a 5-year old or a 10-year old, and we're also talking about the adolescent because there's a lot of trauma that happens in adolescence.
mm,
I would say that I experienced more trauma in adolescence than I did in my early childhood. Would you
mm.
say that's true of you as well, Yvette?
I think my early childhood is what led me to the trauma that I experienced as an adolescent. So I don't know if that's completely true. I feel like
Mm-hmm.
the childhood trauma was more often and it led me to make maybe some bad decisions that led me to more trauma.
Mm-hmm. Right. They can't really be separated out, but I know I experienced in adolescence a lot more shame and a lot more low self-esteem. Maybe it was just all adding up to that. But anyway, so when I'm talking about the inner child, I'm talking about from pre-birth all the way up. And to tell you the truth, I'm 70 years old and I could go back to a traumatic event that happened when I'm 50. And if I haven't felt and expressed and processed that, I'm talking about an inner child.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay. So don't just limit it to one time period because you can do this work with something that happened to you a month ago. So what happens in childhood is that we have these traumatic events and all through our lives that cause us harm and that we have a hard time forgiving.
Mhm.
So forgiveness is what this life is all about. Because, and I've talked to you about this before, we have multiple lifetimes. It takes lifetimes to mature,
Mhm.
right? And when we're less mature, we create more harm for ourselves and more harm for the world, more harm for other people, more
Mhm.
harm for the planet than when we're more mature.
Mhm.
And so we all have lifetimes in which we did horrible things to each other. Every horrible thing that could be done to a human being has been done. And if you've watched many like World War II movies or read much about the Holocaust or if you know much about what's going on with MK Ultra and all that kind of stuff, which I'm not going to talk about right now, but it's like the abuses
Mhm.
that humanity does to humanity
Yeah.
is off the charts.
Yeah, I was watching, that reminds me, I was watching the show earlier today, and they were saying that when you experience pain, you pass it on to somebody else, and it just keeps repeating, like, it was kind of the show is, like, about, it's like a mystical show about, like, elves and humans, and basically one human stole the power of the elves, and now there's this huge war, and everybody hates each other, and the king finally was like, "When is this gonna stop?" Like, you're gonna keep repeating the cycle until
Right,
you choose to have peace. If you're just gonna keep creating pain for everybody if you don't let it go.
right. You're
Mhm.
absolutely right. This is exactly what I'm going to talk about today.
Yeah.
Because what happens when we die is we drop our body, but our thoughts and feelings go with us. And if you have unhealed pain, you haven't forgiven someone, well, guess what? You're corded to that person.
Mhm.
And you come back with them into other lifetimes, and you replay the lifetime, and it's going to be in a completely different form. In the original lifetime, they may have been a stranger that hurt you. In this lifetime, they're your husband
Mhm.
or your child. But
Yeah.
then something's going to play out that's going to cause you to feel exactly the same way, because we are giving ourselves another opportunity
Mhm.
to feel, express, and process those emotions and get rid of them out of our energy field.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this in other classes. When you have those emotions, you're in victim consciousness. Well, guess what? You attract other victims to you, and victims, they tend to blame each other,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
nothing
and
ever
it
gets
creates
resolved.
more pain and suffering for both of whoever you're hurting. 'Cause there's a saying, hurt people, and it's true, like,
Yeah.
if you're more hurt, you're gonna hurt others because misery loves company, like, you want others to feel your pain, you don't wanna be alone in that pain, so
Hmm.
you pass it on to other people, and then it just creates this big cycle of hatred within humanity, and it doesn't end.
Right. And you often pass it on to your family members. Parents pass it on to their kids or
Yeah.
their wives or their partners. And then kids pass it on to other kids.
Yeah. Yeah, or if they have kids, they pass it on to their kids, and that's
Hmm.
what generational trauma comes in, and it's a big
Exactly.
cycle.
So now do you understand why this is the most important class you'll ever hear?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In order to heal ourselves, we need to end the pain. In order to heal the world, we have to end the pain in the world. And
Mhm.
so the end result of doing inner child rescue work is forgiveness.
Mm.
And there is a lesson from the Course in Miracles. I talk about the Course in Miracles a lot, but I never talk, I've never specifically talked about any lesson. And when I was creating this class, this was one of the lessons I was doing. So this is lesson 247, and it says, without forgiveness, I will still be blind.
Mm.
Sin is the symbol of attack. Behold it anywhere, and I will suffer. For forgiveness is the only means whereby Christ's vision comes to me. Let me accept what his sight shows me as the simple truth, and I am healed completely. On the cross, Jesus was tortured to death, basically. He was beaten, put a crown of thorns on, humiliated, tortured, hung up there on a cross, nailed up there on the cross. He was tortured to death. And what was the last words he said before he died?
Wasn't it like forgive them all or
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.
Mm.
So let's think about this for a moment. What if he had said, Father, damn them to hell?
Mm.
What would have happened to Jesus?
He wouldn't have been a symbol for hope or love or anything.
Right. And he would have come back. He would have courted to those people, come back into who knows how many other lifetimes, relive that particular scenario in a different form. To me, forgiveness was the main thing Jesus taught, love and forgiveness.
Yeah.
Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. And what have I said over and over and over in these classes? Everyone is doing the,
Best they
go
can
ahead.
with the consciousness they have.
If
Yeah.
they could do better, they would do better. And in some lifetime, they will do better. The end result of inner child rescue work is forgiveness. But we're going to put all that aside.
Mm.
As much as I've talked about it, we're going to put all that aside because it is the child that is hurt.
Mhm.
And the only time in your life you're truly a victim is during childhood and adolescence, because you can't separate yourself from those obnoxious parents or those obnoxious people in your life that are doing those cruel things to you.
Mhm.
You can't take care of yourself. You're not emotionally, you're not intellectually sophisticated enough to process it, you're not emotionally developed enough to deal with it. You are, as a child, you're dependent on the role modeling of the people around you to help you get through these things. And when the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who are abusing you, see how crazy making that is?
Yeah.
There is no way that
Mm,
you can handle that in childhood. And
mm,
so when we do inner child rescue work, we're only dealing with the child's feelings. We're not dealing with any emotions of the adult. So what happens with adults is they'll go to church or they'll somehow get the idea, I need to forgive these people. And so they'll try to intellectualize it
mhm,
without going back to the child, allowing that child to feel its feelings
mhm.
and doing the processing work.
Yeah. Yeah, a big thing for me was intellectualizing, because I was always very self-aware, and I think when I was triggered by something, I would always be like, "Why?" I always thought about what part of my childhood caused me to react this way? And then I would think about it, and sometimes, like, but you don't allow yourself to process that, or you don't allow yourself to feel, and it's almost like you're fighting your
You're
sadness,
fighting with yourself,
angry,
right?
yeah,
Hmm.
and then you never get over it because then you start getting mad at yourself that you're hurt, and that's not healing either.
You're absolutely right. And that's why talk therapy doesn't work. That's why you can go to church and you can hear all these great things that
Mhm,
are said, but it's not going to take away the pain. You have to do this work. You know, go to church and I've heard people say, oh, when I first went through my awakening, Jesus took away all this pain and so forth and all. You know, and I do believe that those miracles occur, but it didn't occur in my life. And I
yeah,
don't think it occurs in the life of most people.
yeah,
You have to work at this. Inner healing is a lot of work, and it's a good thing it is because it's in the doing of it. The steps to getting there are the properties of being there,
mhm, yeah,
right? You have to do the work in order to learn what you need to learn to
mm,
become a better person. When you do this work, you put the forgiveness part aside as an adult. Yes, I've forgiven my mom. But when I go to my inner child, I forget that part. I
mm,
just want to deal with pain, what she felt, and how to heal her. Inner child rescue work has four main parts. You have to do this in an altered state. Most people will need the help of a hypnotherapist. So I learned this information during my hypnotherapy training. And when you have a hypnotherapist, you go into a light trance. Now, you don't go into a kind of, a lot of people have seen stage hypnotists that can put them in such a deep state of trance that, he tells them to quack like a duck or whatever, and they do it, and, all this stuff. Well, that's not what hypnotherapy is about. In hypnotherapy, you go into a middle state of trance, which is very similar to when you're really deeply engrossed in a great movie, focused on the images that you're seeing,
mm,
you're feeling, I'm sure you've gone to sad movies and you're crying and
yeah,
feeling all this intense emotion and you're really angry at that character and,
mhm,
all these things, right?
yeah,
And that's what it's like with hypnotherapy. Your eyes are closed, you're visualizing an event happening. And then if you have a hypnotherapist, they will have you relive that event that the child experienced. Say you were sexually abused. Now, this is a lot of people really, really resist this part because they've been trying all their lives to forget that pain. You
mm,
cannot forget the pain. You
yeah,
can't sweep it under the carpet. You cannot do that.
mm,
It doesn't work. You will always trip on it. So you have to remember the event. You have to relive the event in an altered state. Now, I did all my inner child rescue work by myself, but I'm pretty darn good at this. Most people will need a hypnotherapist, and that hypnotherapist will help you to create a safe space. Say you were being sexually abused by a really brutal parent,
Mm,
or lots of people are abused by a step parent. Step parents are more likely to sexually abuse people than the actual parent.
mm,
But uncles, grandparents, they can all be part of the problem. And you're afraid of that person. Say you're 30 years old and you're afraid of that person. You're afraid of standing up to them. You're afraid of putting a stop to it. You're afraid of seeing this event again. So it's the hypnotherapist may set up a situation where the adult self is watching the event happen through a window. So there's like a separation that occurs
mm,
so that you're not actually in the room with that abuser. And so you will relive the event. Now, I never had to see it through a window because most of my trauma was emotional. So I don't know how it would be if you were severely beaten or abused or sexually abused. But I was always able to re-experience that event, and you re-experience it as though you're happening now, as though you're a child. So in your visualization, where your eyes are closed, you can put a scarf over your eyes or, some those things that you put on at night to block out the light, and you're imagining it. So this is an imaginal process. You imagine it happening with
mm,
your dad or your mom or a sibling or a friend or whoever it was that caused the problem. And I wouldn't go to sexual abuse right away. I'd do this with things that are
mm.
easier to handle
Yeah.
till you get the hang of it. Okay. You're imagining going through it as though you're a child. You're seeing yourself as the child. You're not seeing yourself as the adult person you are today. You're seeing that 5-year old or that 6-year old or that 10-year old or that 14-year old. You're seeing them in that experience with whoever the abuser is.
Mm,
You're, in a sense, recalling, remembering what they said, and then you're making it up, re-experiencing as though he said, she said, he said, she said,
mm,
right? Back and forth. You're remembering. One of the last people I had in my classes had an event in which she was in a bedroom with her sister, and this stranger came into her room and sexually abused both of them. It was
oh,
like, the things that happen to people are just unbelievable. Mom and dad sleeping in another part of the house.
mm,
Never even knew it.
oh, wow.
And these children were young enough so that they didn't even have words
Mm,
to tell the parents about it. So I'm just telling you this to understand how challenging this work can be.
yeah.
Because if you're emotionally stuck there, trapped there, you're not going to know what to do or what to say to heal that child. So you're experiencing it as though it's happening now, and you're feeling the feelings, and you're making those feelings bigger. And the way that I made them bigger is I articulated them to myself as though they were actually happening now. So using the example I just gave, I think this person was like 6 or 7 years old when this happened. She was, I'm in a dark room. There's somebody here. I don't know who that is. So
Mm,
you'd be articulating that to yourself,
mhm,
making those feelings bigger, because what you're wanting to get to is the emotions. And if you don't make those feelings bigger, you will never get to them. And most people are going, I don't want to see it. I
mm,
don't want to feel it. I don't want to hear it.
yeah.
Right? That's why they never get healed.
Mm,
So the key to this, when you're visualizing yourself as that inner child in that experience, it's as if the energy field of who you were then comes back
mm,
into play. And so now you're seeing it, hearing it, feeling the trauma. He's coming closer. He's coming closer. Oh my God, he's got his hand over my mouth. I can't breathe. I can't say anything. And you don't have to go all the way through the event. You just have to go enough until that child inside of you begins to have emotions around this. And for me, when I did this, you begin to cry.
Mhm.
And what happens when you're in an altered state is your emotions are easy to access. Unlike with talk therapy, you've separated yourself from the event, you're just talking about it, you're not refeeling it. In hypnotherapy, you want to feel these things and you want to feel them with emotional intensity. And the more you can make yourself feel it with it, emotional intensity, the more able you are going to be to get this out of your energy field. So you see it as the child as though it's happening now. You're remembering it and re-experiencing it as though it's happening right now. And then at a certain point, once you've had enough, you're feeling it, you're terrified, you're crying, you're screaming, whatever is happening to you, the adult self steps in. So this is very important. You have to be very mature to do this work if you're
Mhm.
going to do it by yourself. The adult self steps in. And there have been times I've been doing hypnotherapy with people and they can't do it themselves. And so then the next thing I ask, well, your higher self step in. And sometimes you can do it with your higher self, but if they haven't got a good relationship with your higher self, if you're working with a therapist that doesn't know anything about the spiritual realm and doesn't know how to do that part, then you can say to that person as the therapist, I'll say, do you mind if I step in? And
Mhm.
then they will visualize me.
Mhm.
Again, always in an altered state, eyes closed. They will visualize me stepping in and I'll say the words. But the
Mhm.
goal in hypnotherapy is to mature you enough as the adult self to be able to step in and say, what the hell are you doing to my child? And to say it with that intensity and ferocity.
Mhm.
Because one of the things that happens when you're a child, especially if your other parent, say one parent is abusing you and the other is impotent, can't do anything to protect you, is that the child grows up feeling no one loves me, no one protects me. I'm all by myself in this. And so you have to become mature enough as an adult to step in and say, this is over. This is
Mhm.
never going to happen again. I'm not going to allow you to do it. How dare you do that to my child? Don't you know
Mhm.
how much you are harming her? And a few other choice words. And you can use swearing, you can use whatever way you want to say it. When you're really enraged, you have a ferocity, an immensity of energy that
Mhm.
is going to end this addiction,
Mhm.
right? This emotional addiction that you've had. You're going to let that parent know or that abuser know in no uncertain terms, you are never going to do this again because you know what? I am the protector now,
Mhm.
and it is never going to happen again. So you relive the event. You imagine it as though it's happening now. You feel the feelings, imperative to feel the feelings.
Mhm.
Then the adult self steps in, and if not the adult, the higher self, and if not the higher self, the hypnotherapist steps in and says, you're not ever going to do this to my child again. This is over. At a certain point, you will tell the abuser, get out of here. And
Mhm.
you'll watch that abuser fade away. And the child, okay, idealistically, the adult steps in between the child who's behind you
Mhm.
and the abuser. That's really important. The child can be peeking out, at whoever did the abuse, but they're behind you, feeling completely protected by you.
Mhm.
And then you will say to the abuser to get out. They will leave the room or leave the space. They'll fade away, whatever happens in your visualization. You'll
Mhm.
see them disappear. And this is, like I said, an imaginal process. And I'm going to share with you the very first inner child rescue work I ever did. And then you'll see what kind of an imaginal process this is. But
Mhm.
but then you, the adult self, turns to the child and says to them something in the nature of, I am so sorry that happened to you.
Mhm.
That person had no right to do that to you.
Mhm.
And you take that child in your imagination, sit them on your lap, you hold them and rock them and hug them, and you tell that child over and over again that they are lovable, that they did nothing to cause that situation, because what happens when you have abusive parents is that the abusive parents try to make you think it was your behavior
Mhm.
that caused X, Y, and Z. A
Yeah.
child is a child. They have certain behaviors that are obnoxious. An
Mhm.
adult is an adult, and they're the ones who are responsible. So you go through this process of loving, nurturing, healing, and teaching that child the truth about who they are, that they're lovable, that you're there for them, that this is never going to happen again, that you're protected. And of course, what happens when you're abused as a child is you recreate it in adulthood. You create it with partners, right?
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
keep recreating it over and over again. If you're the victim of domestic violence, you get in relationship with a man who or a woman who abuses you.
Mhm.
You know, we recreate these things over and over again. The goal is reprogramming the mind. And when you're doing that reprogramming during this emotional state, so I want you to think about how different your life would have been during those all those traumatic experiences that you had as a child. And since we worked together a long time, you and I know some about some of those. What it would have happened if the other parent had stepped in and said, "I'm sorry, you did not deserve this. I am not going to allow this to happen to you ever again." Would have changed everything, right?
Yeah, because what happens is when emotional, sexual, or physical abuse, when it goes on for so long without anybody stepping in, it builds up, it almost makes it impossible to have a good relationship with that person anymore. I mean, if you were sexually abused, then I don't think you would even want to have any relationship with that person. But, like for parents that maybe verbally abused you because that's how they were treated as a child. It's not that they're a bad person, it's just that's just what they were used to, and that's just what they were just projecting their broken parts of themselves onto you. But it creates
Mhm.
sort of resentment for the rest of your life because it never stopped. There was no apology, there was no like sincere, it's like even though one day maybe it stops, that feeling and those memories, they're still gonna be there. They were never resolved. Yeah.
And that breaks the bond between you and your parent, especially if it's ongoing. You know, with
Yeah.
my mom, it was ongoing my whole adult life.
Mm.
You know, it's like, hmm.
Yeah.
It broke the bond.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
like,
there's
I
no
don't
way
care about you.
there's no way to fix it at that point.
Right. The reprogramming part, the nurturing and the healing part, that is extremely important. I mean, every part of this is extremely important. So the last part of this, so re-education, because eventually these are going to become new mantras in your mind, right? I am always healed and protected. I am loved wherever I go, and so forth and so on. Then you invite your guides and angels in. And for people who don't have a spiritual life, well, they're out of touch with their guides and angels. It's not that their guides and angels aren't there,
Yeah.
because there are unseen beings in other dimensions who are out of phase with this frequency of vibration that we are in, who
Mhm.
are guiding you your entire life, who are there for you your entire life, who love you and care about you. There are, if you've lost grandparents or people that you've loved, a parent or somebody you've loved, a lot of times they can become someone that is an unseen being, very much alive, but out of frequency with the third dimension, who very much exists, can be part of this team
Mhm.
of unseen beings who are there to help you. And their specialty is energy work, because they're energetic beings, they're spiritual beings. They don't have a physical body, but they do know how to use energy.
Yeah.
And so you can call in your higher self, you can call in your soul, the higher parts of you, you can call in God, Goddess, all that is. You can call in these unseen friends who love you unconditionally. They know everything you've gone through. They know about all your past lives. They know all the traumas you've ever had. They're wondering how you can even continue on.
Mm. Yeah.
You know, Lazar says that everyone who incarnates into the physical plane This third dimension is utterly and completely courageous. That the rest of the universe, all these beings in higher dimensions, they look at us as heroes
Mm,
because there's nothing easy about being in a reality where we have unhealed trauma for generation after generation after generation after generation,
mhm. Yeah,
where our belief system is all screwed up, where we know nothing about reality creation, where our religions are some of, good and bad,
yeah. Like you said in the last class, we're born into a world that makes no sense.
right?
Like, nothing made sense. Like, you have to basically start with as a blank slate. I mean, with the exception of what you carry in from past lives, but, as a baby, you don't know anything. You don't know what anything is. You don't remember you don't remember who you were or what it felt like to not be physical. You don't know anything. And
Hmm.
it's confusing because then you're programmed when you're very young to believe certain things from what your parents tell you, what teachers tell you, or, you just learn things about the world. And there's things that are also true about the world that no one teaches you. And it's very confusing to learn that you've been lied to your whole life. And,
Right. Hmm.
then your whole world comes crashing down and you're confused and you're lost. And it's very difficult.
And you don't know where to go. And if you haven't got a wise teacher to help you, you stay that way your whole life.
Yeah. Hmm.
So these unseen beings know more than you know, and their specialty is energetic healing. And so then you go through an imaginal experience, you're making it up and just pretending, where these unseen beings, one or two or three or four, if you're really bonded to Jesus or another religious figure, you can have them come into the imaginal experience, see them walk in the door, and the adult self, the child sitting on your lap, if it's a child, if it's an adolescent, that wouldn't be true, but you're holding it, you're loving the child, and you're introducing your child. These are your unseen friends.
Hmm. Yeah.
These are the beings that love you. This is your higher self. This is your soul. And you're explaining to this child,
Mhm.
you're not alone. It may seem like there's nobody in the room with you, but these beings are always here. They're always connected to you.
Mhm.
It's them, it's we that feel separate from them. They do not feel separate from us, which is kind of a mind-blowing thing when you
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
And so you begin to introduce them and you say to that child, they're here to do some energy work with you. Here to help you heal. And I had, in my imagination, one of the things that Lazarus taught us to do was to create a safe place in our imagination where we go back to all the time to do healing work. And my safe place is a beautiful place out in nature. There's this beautiful lake that is there with it. On the far side, there's a kind of a waterfall that comes into it. There's this opening where there's some trees. And anyway, in all the years of my meditative work, I placed a bench in there that I can sit there with this inner guide that I call the beloved, which is probably a combination of my higher self and soul. And we sit there and we'll do prayer work. We'll do all kinds of healing work there. I've done hundreds of rituals in this space. And in
Mhm.
one of the meditations that I did with Lazarus, he was guiding us through a visualization, and the whole workshop was on fear. And I was so afraid in this visualization, I couldn't, I kind of lost touch with what Lazarus said. And I came back to the same place. My beloved was there, and he and I put this giant cross in my safe place. And
Mm.
I don't consider myself a Christian, especially back then. I was not a Christian. As
Yeah.
far as I hadn't even forgiven Christianity, that was a whole process that I had to go through to
Yeah.
forgive Christianity for the things that they have done in the past. And I was years and years away from that. But anyway, we put this cross there and it became a symbol of safety for me. And I have done hundreds of meditations in this safe place where my beloved and I would sit on this bench and we would look at the cross, or we would look out over this lake. And I did all kinds of ritual healings and ritual baths in this lake. where we would go to this lake. You could take your inner child to this lake or take them to a hot springs where the water's really warm. Say they were sexually abused. Well, when you're sexually abused, you just feel really filthy. You
Mm,
feel really violated. You feel really dirty inside. You take them with your angels and guides, and you all get into the water together, and you feel the pain seeping away
mm,
into the water, healing through the elements, of water. And you might have your angels and guides do laying on of hands in certain places on the body, the heart, the throat, the crown, the third eye, all the time explaining to them about past lives and how we cord to people and, all the things you should have been told when
mm,
you were a child
yeah.
that nobody told you. So
Mhm,
that you're going to recreate your life so that by the time you're done with inner child rescue work, you're going to know everything you should have known,
mhm,
everything that you should have been told. You will have felt and re-expressed your pain. Will have released it energetically from your energy field. Will have experienced healing rituals,
mm,
right? Through all kinds of magical and miraculous ways. And I've done enough hypnotherapy with people to know that, when I say to them, well, now it's time for the healing portion of this meditation, we're going to visualize your guides and angels coming into the room, and some kind of healing ceremony is going to unfold. And people never know what that's going to be before the meditation starts. I never tell them what it is.
mhm,
They make it up right there on the spot, and something always comes through. Something beautiful
mm,
always comes through. This is the most magical and miraculous work you will ever do. It will heal you in every way. Now, when I learned how to do this, I learned in my hypnotherapy training. And that training, I think it took about 6 months to complete. It was one of those weekend things where we went Friday, Saturday, and Sunday every weekend for several months. And how that training worked was we were given information in the morning. We sat as a group, just kind of the way Lazarus did it. When I went to all my workshops with him, he would give us information. Well, this is inner child rescue work. This is how you do it. I've basically taken all of this from my classes. Then in the afternoon, we would get into small groups and then we would take turns putting each other into trance. And of course, we were just students. We were just learning this. We weren't experienced hypnotherapists or anything. Once you finish the classes, if you wanted to take the classes again, you could take them for free. And when you took them for free the second time, you became someone who would be observing and monitoring newbies
mm,
that were doing the work. Okay, so that's how that all unfolded. And I not only took those classes, I also retook the classes twice and did that as well. So I volunteered to be the first. I would say I was emotionally abused as a child from a very young age by my mom. I wanted to do inner child rescue work, and I told my therapist that this was what I wanted to do. So when you do hypnotherapy with people, you put them in a light state of trance. There's this whole process that you go through to help their body relax and so forth and so on. And then you implant in the subconscious mind that certain memories are going to come back into your mind. So I've got this amateur therapist with me,
mm,
and she says, go back to one of the earliest memories you have of being abused. So I saw myself as a 2-year-old standing at the front door of a house I lived in until I was 3. And I could tell I was 2 because in meditation, using my imaginal eyes, I looked at my hands and they were very little. I was standing at the front door and I didn't know what to do. My therapist didn't know what to tell me either because she was so, inexperienced. And she says, well, can you go into the house? And so I say, okay. And I open the door and I go into the house and I immediately burst into tears. And my therapist, she's like, oh my God, what do I do now? With this situation,
yeah,
I don't know what to say. And
yeah,
she finally says, what's wrong? And I say to her, I'm so hungry. And she says, "Well, where's your mom?" And I said, "My mom's in the bedroom and she doesn't want to come out."
Mm.
And she says, "Well, can you go into the kitchen and get something to eat?" Because I'm still sobbing. I
Yeah.
mean, I had no idea any of this was going to come forward, none.
Mm.
And I am sobbing. It's like a dam has broken. And I go into the kitchen and I start looking in the cupboards and in the refrigerator, and the only thing I can find to eat is on a really high cupboard. There's a baby bottle with this much milk in it. The therapist says, "Well, we need to get your mother." And my mother used to abuse me by withholding food.
Mm.
So that until I had this meditation, I had completely forgotten this chapter of my life, and it came right back
Mm.
during this visualization.
Mm.
And so she says to me, "I want you to visualize," which is something a hypnotherapist should never be this directive, but she says, "I want you to visualize
Mm.
bringing your mother into the room." And so I saw my mom walk into the room. I'm still this little 2-year-old. And my mom, when she walks into the room, she doesn't have any hands.
Mm.
Well, that is a complete departure from reality.
Yeah.
My mom always had hands, but symbolically, it meant that she had no ability to nurture me. And I cried and I cried and I cried because this was the first time that I had this understanding and that this memory came back to me. The hypnotherapist eventually, I mean, she tried to manipulate the visualization so that I got my food, and I said that I was going along with it, but I could never visualize it in my mind.
Mhm.
And that's one of the things I learned as a hypnotherapist. You don't kind of force imagery. You
Yeah.
just let ever unfolds. And if the visualization seems incomplete, that's okay. You just come back to it again another time. And so after I came out of this meditation, well, I received like a download of information, right?
Mhm.
All these things. I mean, the abuse went back to pre-verbal times
Mhm.
and bringing up memories that I had completely forgotten about how my mom controlled me through food. At that time in my life, I had a lot of allergies to foods and things I couldn't eat and so forth and so on. And all of a sudden, my life's starting to make sense to me. And I want to say that because I hit on such an important event in my childhood, it was like a dam broke. I cried for days.
Mhm.
Talk about releasing energy from your energy field.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how you do it.
Mm.
That's how you get it out. You release it. And then later on, I did a lot of rescue work with my young child. You know, I did visualization. Now, this event of my mom withholding food from me was a real event, but you see how that so much of this was imaginal?
Yeah.
So you're using your imagination to heal yourself. The imagination is a feminine energy. It is your greatest tool for
Mm.
creating your reality. And what have we been taught eh, during our lives about imagination? You just don't
Oh,
make things
yeah.
up. That does no good. That doesn't work. You're just
Yeah.
making it up.
Or like think practical, think logical. Yeah.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So we have been taught to dampen down our imaginations. It's okay for movie makers to be imaginative and show us what they've created in their imagination, but we haven't been encouraged to use our imagination ourselves. And
Yeah.
so when you do hypnotherapy, it's this completely imaginal process. And so during the next weeks and even the next couple of months, I did lots and lots of visualizations with my inner child in which I just imagined taking her to the market and buying all of these yummy foods and taking her to my safe place and laying out this picnic blanket and sitting in the safe place, eating delicious foods and, oh, let's see what else is in the basket, and and handing them to my inner child and having her enjoy this relationship that she was having with me, maybe bringing my higher self in, to enjoy the experience with us because I'm wanting her to get to know her higher self as well because we have the same higher self. I probably did maybe 10 visualizations around this kind of theme, all making it up,
Mm,
and every one of those was incredibly powerful
yeah.
because I was learning how to heal myself, how to love myself, how to give myself permission to nurture myself, which I didn't have a mother that was nurturing. So I didn't learn that. I didn't have it role model to me. I didn't have the feeling. I always felt like an outsider. I
Mm,
didn't know how to nurture myself. I had a very strong negative inner voice, the voice of the negative ego. You're no good. You'll never do anything right. You'll always be a failure, right? All these messages that were basically implanted in me by my mother, but
mm.
they're also part of the natural course of living life. I can't blame everything on my mom. But do you see how these visualizations were so extremely important
Oh, yeah.
for me?
Yeah, and they can be incredibly healing because it reprograms a deeper part of you into understanding that what you went through was not okay, but there's a
Hmm.
different way to think about it to promote healing and to get over it and to forgive, whoever or whatever, you know?
Yes, yes. It took me a long time to forgive my mom, but once I did all this inner child rescue work and worked on my shadow and dealt with my negative ego and all these things, it's like not hard at all to do
Yeah.
the forgiveness work because, I could see she was doing the best she could with the consciousness she's got and, all of that kind of stuff. And it really is true.
Mhm.
Even Jesus's murderers were doing the best they can with the consciousness they had.
Yeah.
They could have done better, they would have. So let me share with you just some of hypnotherapy sessions that I have done for people. So I worked with a girl that had been date raped when she was 13 by two 18-year-old boys.
Mhm.
And I think they were friends of her brother or something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but they had convinced her to get into the car with them and they were going to take her someplace that was fun to go. Well, while they were in the car with her, they took turns raping her.
Mhm.
And when she got back to her house and she told her parents what had happened, they were really mad at her because she had gotten into the car with these two boys. It's like, didn't you know better?
Mhm.
So when I tried to do the hypnotherapy session with her, we couldn't make much progress because she thought this was all her fault.
Yeah.
And so I had to end the session and take her out of trance. And then we had to sit there and talk. I had to explain to her, this was not your fault.
Mhm.
How are you to know?
Yeah.
You don't think 18-year-old boys should be held accountable
Right.
for their behavior,
Yeah.
for such heinous behavior,
Mhm.
that this was your fault,
Mhm.
right? And so once she began to understand that, we could go back into the trance, relive the experience. She can feel the fear and pain, and we could actually heal it right then and there. Another thing that's important to know is that some inner child rescue work is just about re education. Everybody, when they're in adolescence, we live in this crazy world where we're taught all kinds of erroneous things about sex. Young girls are taught that they should be sexual by the time they're 12
Mhm. Yeah.
or maybe younger. We're taught, girls are taught to sexualize their bodies and to make themselves attractive to the opposite sex at an unbelievably young age when they should be not even thinking about those things.
Yeah.
And boys have been taught all kinds of things about sex from the movies. They're taught that, well, girls want this and they want it all the time. They want it as much as I do. And,
Mhm.
all of this kind of stuff. And the movies make it look like every time a woman has sex, she's having this great orgasm, when 90% of the time she's just lying there faking it. And
Mhm.
so men or boys, when they're teenagers, they get all kinds of erroneous messages about sex. And women, they have they sexualize themselves and then they have sex and go, oh my God, that was horrid,
Mhm.
right? And they get all kinds of erroneous messages as well. But then they think, well, I should be like this.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it takes years to figure all this out. And by the time you figure all this out, women hate men, men hate women. They've got all this conflict going on, and nothing's working out for them. In this kind of inner child rescue work, you're going back to those memories of when you were first learning about sex. And, it might have been a parent that was teaching you this stuff, but more often than not, it's going to be other peers. It's going to be a movie that you watched or
Mm,
something of that nature. And so you go back to that particular experience and then you watch it. The adult self, watch it with your adolescent self sitting there beside you, and your adult self is going, "That's Looney Tunes.
yeah, like,
Let's
that's
turn this
not
off. If it was a movie, let's turn
yeah,
this off and talk about this."
yeah.
And then the adult self sits down with that adolescent and says, "I've got more experience than you. And let me tell you how it really is." And they do this in an age appropriate way. So say if you're sexually abused from the time you're 6 or even 2, I've had children sexually abused from the time they were 2, and they're learning all this stuff about sex and men, you know, they'll make little girls watch porn and say, "Do this to me, do that to me." It's like, oh my God, it's the grossest thing that you can possibly imagine. And
Mhm,
so,
mm,
if this has happened to you, you're going to go in to that child.
mm,
You're going to tell off that asshole in no uncertain terms. You're going to sit down with that child. You're going to love that child and nurture that child. And you're going to tell them the truth about sex. You shouldn't even be knowing about this right now. Unacceptable, completely unacceptable. And this is not the way sex is.
mm,
Sex can be beautiful when you are old enough and mature enough to handle it,
mm, yeah,
right? So, and sometimes here's another thing that happens. I did a inner child rescue work with my inner adolescent, and I had really real body image problems, partly because of my mom and always telling me, I needed to curl my hair, I need to do this or that, or wear makeup, or this or that, or that. I wasn't ever acceptable the way I was, and I had really body image problems, and so I just didn't think I was beautiful. So I decided to do an inner child rescue work with my adolescent, and so I visualize her in an altered state, and I go in and I'm wanting her to talk and to feel, because you want to always get to the feelings, and she's telling me how unattractive she is and how this, that, and the other that she is, and I don't know what to say to her because I have all the same feelings
mhm,
because
yeah,
I hadn't healed myself yet.
yeah,
And so I came out of that meditation, and then I go into meditation with my higher self. And my higher self says to me, "You don't understand. Beauty has nothing to do with the way you look. It has everything to do with how you are within. And I can guarantee you, to my eyes, you are beautiful."
mm,
My higher self said that to me. And that again just cried and cried and cried and cried because I had never heard that.
yeah, and
And
healing
certainly
is
had never been able to tell myself that.
yeah. Yeah, and, a lot of healing is painful. Reliving things and reprogramming the way that you were taught about things, it's very painful. It's kind of almost like even though it is a negative thought process, that's what got you so far, and in a way, you're shedding that part of yourself that got you so far in the first place.
Hmm.
So it's almost like I can see how some people may feel like even though it's a bad part of them, separating from that bad part of them can make them feel like they're losing a part of themselves. And I
Yes,
feel like
you're
yeah.
right, because that's their identity, especially if
Mhm.
their identity is being a victim. We trauma bond with each other over the bad things that have happened to us. And, there are people who create whole support groups about being sexually abused, and that's good for a time, but not if that's where your friends are. I have to bond with you over my traumas.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
'cause
have,
then I don't think people like that really, because it's almost like they're encouraging them to stay in that same to remember it. Like,
yes.
like you said, reliving it is you're supposed to get over it, but if you're reliving it every day just to remember it and not to actually heal from it,
Hmm.
then it can be more harmful.
Right, and to identify with being a victim. That's
Yeah.
what they're doing, and they're just keeping the victim mentality going and then recreating that scenario over and over again. I think I've told you this before, this inner child rescue, where I developed a very close and intimate relationship with this inner guide that I call the beloved, who I saw as this very attractive man. And in that, when I was doing this, I was in my early 40s, and I needed that kind of relationship. I needed to be held by a man and nurtured. I'm heterosexual. If you're homosexual, you might want to do it with the same sex, but I needed that kind of love. And this is an imaginal process. Your higher self and soul don't have a body. They don't care how you visualize them. They just want to get it across to you at a feeling level,
Yeah.
right? And so what happens in your visualization is up to you.
Mm,
But, I was constantly, because I was so bereft of love, I
mm,
was so bereft of nurturing, that when I first began this relationship with my beloved, I'd have these go into meditation, have these experiences where I would ask him over and over again, "Do you love me? Do you love me?" And he was always telling me yes. And then he got to one time, he says, "You know what? I can tell you yes 1,000 times, but if you don't believe me even once, what's the point?"
mm.
And
Yeah.
that hit me like a ton of bricks.
Mm.
That was another thing that it was like, wow,
Yeah.
yeah, what's the point?
Yeah, and a lot of couples, a lot of people are like that. Because I mean,
Mm,
I'm assuming that's coming from insecurity. You know, you feel
mhm.
like you're not worth, you know, like you're kind of asking, like, do you love me? Because in a way, you probably didn't feel worthy of being loved.
Right. Mhm.
And that's how it is with a lot of relationships,
Right.
especially if you're not emotionally mature. I've seen a lot of people, they constantly have to ask their partner, "Oh, you love me, right? Oh, I love you. Do you love me?" And
Right.
you know,
Mhm.
it's like if you have to ask them all the time, I saw this thing, I was like, the more you give something that anxious, dependent energy, the more wants to slip away from you.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that's, you know, like, it's different when you're with your guy, the beloved, because he'll love you unconditionally because
Right.
that's,
Mhm.
it's designed for you. But with another human, you can't have that codependency to where that person's gonna get tired of that. That person
Yeah.
isn't emotionally
Totally.
mature enough to tell you what the beloved told you, you
Right.
know?
Mhm.
Most people won't even put up with that, or they don't even know how to say, like, "This is just too much," or, you
Right.
know,
Well,
communicate.
and it is too much
Yeah,
because that person who feels that way needs to heal themselves.
yes. Yeah, yeah,
They can't expect to get love from a partner when they can't give it to themselves. See,
mhm,
when I'm talking about my beloved, I'm really talking about the higher parts of me giving this gift to me. I personally, there might be ways, but I personally don't know how you can heal without having a spiritual relationship with the higher parts of you.
mm,
I
yeah,
just don't know how it can be done. When I did my inner child rescue work, so I learned about it in my hypnotherapy training, which took place before I began working with Lazarus.
mm,
And then when I began working with Lazarus, the first 10 years, so I've been working with him for about 30 years. The
mm,
first 10 years were all about spiritual healing, all about emotional healing. I would call what he did with us a spiritual psychology.
mm,
So he taught us all about shame and what it is, childhood shame, adolescent shame, young adult shame. We did whole workshops on each one of those aspects. Of course, when I talked to you about your unconscious creation in that second class, we talked about the inner demon and the dark law and the negative script and all those things. Those were all separate workshops I took. And
mm,
I took all those workshops, which would have taken me how many classes
mhm,
to talk to you about. I condensed it all into one
mhm,
because my goal for you is that you get the big picture,
mm,
and that you take it apart for yourself and then do the work. And what I want to say is that Lazarus, on his website at lazarus.com, he has all of these audio recordings
mm,
because he didn't the entire workshop wasn't recorded and isn't for sale, but he always did what the Friday night. So the workshops were either Wednesday night through Sunday or Friday night through Sunday in length. And the first night, those were always recorded. And that's when he gave the basic ideas that he was going to teach in the workshop. And the glory of Lazarus, what makes Lazarus so unique among all the other channel beings out there, is that he would give the information and then he would guide you through a guided visualization. And so all of these recordings are at Lazarus.com, Lazaris.com. And my suggestion is that you look at whatever issues you have inside of you. Say you've got shame. Well, I had gobs of shame. So go and buy all those shame tapes. I think
Mm,
they're $25. They used to be, they may be a little bit more, but they were $25 each. I also had a lot of problems with self-pity. Go and buy the self-pity tapes. If you've got issues with anger, jealousy, or rage, go and buy those tapes. If you have problems with self-sabotage or self-punishment, go and buy those tapes. You see what I'm saying?
yeah.
All the information is on there, plus a guided visualization. And my feeling is that for most people who are watching this kind of show, you're going to be pretty advanced metaphysically. I know you're young, Yvette, but you're advanced. Some of you may be able to guide yourself through an inner child rescue work, meditation, but most people won't.
Mm,
And if you can't, you need to find a hypnotherapist who knows how to do this work. And the kind of hypnotherapist who knows how to do this work is called an alchemical hypnotherapist. They're going to know how to do soul retrieval. They're going to know how to connect you with your higher self all through hypnotherapy, all through this visualization format in which you're in a light state of trance. And once you've experienced a few times, you might be able to run yourself through it by yourself. Now,
mm,
this is how I do it when I run myself through any kind of visualization. Well, I have this great bond that I have with my beloved,
mm,
and I see him clearly in form, and I have for 30 years now, basically.
mm,
And if you haven't got that, you want to see your higher self personified in form, either as a male or female, and you will see something that's attractive to you. You might see like a mystical type person or some kind, sometimes you'll see a person that's like from a tarot card that, with a beard or something that symbolizes wisdom to you, but maybe not. I see my beloved is an attractive male about the same age as me back then, and you'll begin this process of creating a relationship. And so you want to develop your visualization skills.
mm,
And so it's important before you do inner child rescue work that you start there,
mm,
visualizing your higher self, visualizing a safe place. Lazarus always suggests to do it in a place in nature, but with all of the work that I've done with clients, some people will have this, they'll create a place in a house or a beautiful room or something like that. They feel safer there than they do outside. So don't limit yourself, but you want it to be a place that's beautiful, that just has that resonance to you of safety and of beauty, of, to me, when I'm outside in nature and it's extremely beautiful, it's like the goddess is right there with me, this beautiful just beauty just wafting into me. But
mm,
it has to come out of your imagination. Okay, so you're making it up, you're just pretending. At a certain moment, you will have your higher self come into the scene and you'll see them from far off walking in, or they'll just appear there. They'll come like sparkly light, and then all of a sudden personify themselves in form. You can, any way you see it,
mm,
the experience is yours. And one of the things that happens to you, in the beginning you think, oh, I'm just making all this up, and you're just making all this up. It's true. But in time, when you do this work with your higher self, they start saying things to you like my higher self did when he said, I could tell you 10,000 times, but if you won't believe me once, what's the point? It's like that hit you like a ton of bricks. That didn't come out of my conscious mind.
mm.
That
Yeah.
came out of my higher conscious mind. And that's happened more than once. Believe me, it's like, whoa, I never would have thought of that in a million years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you start realizing I'm not making this up by myself. I am co-creating this visualization with
Mm,
a higher part of me. And that's when everything becomes really exciting.
mm,
And I'm not saying that every visualization you have is like that, but enough will be like that that you know that there is something bigger than me that is taking place here.
Mhm.
That's when you're really in touch with your inner guidance.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, you have to be careful when you're talking to your inner guidance because if you have a belief system that is telling you something that you believe is true, all you're ever going to hear is your higher self saying that. It's
Mhm.
not because that's what your higher self wants to say to you.
Yeah.
That's the only thing you're going to allow them to say. So
Mhm.
let me give you an example. So I consider myself to be a very healthy 70-year-old. I'm very careful about what I eat. I eat a lot of vegetables. I eat real food, organic food. I make sure I get 8 hours of sleep a night. I exercise every day. I do everything right.
Mhm.
And for the most part, I'm really healthy, but I've had gut issues for about 30 years, ever since I took a really terrible antibiotic
Mhm.
that destroyed my gut, basically. And so I'm trying to heal this. And this took place before anybody knew anything about the microbiome or anything about probiotics. And there was no research that I can do on this. It happened before the internet, and it's like, well, what do you do? Right?
Yeah.
And so I'm just following all the literature, and the internet comes along, and I'm watching all kinds of webinars and summits on health and healing, and they're all telling me to eat a really healthy diet full of vegetables and this, that, and the other. And it's like, nothing is healing me.
Mhm.
Well, eventually I find out I have SIBO. I
Mhm.
don't know if you know what SIBO is. It's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and it's something that happens when you've had this thing happen in your gut where your antibiotics are you've taken antibiotics and your gut's wiped out and everything's not in balance anymore, and certain species disappear, and so nothing's in balance. And everybody, I mean, it's estimated that half the world's population has this, and they
Mhm.
don't know it because a lot of doctors don't know what SIBO is.
Yeah.
And so they just told, well, you have irritable bowel syndrome or you have diverticulitis or Crohn's disease. Well, the core of these diseases is SIBO. And
Mhm.
what happens is that there are bacteria that belong in your gut that kind of crawl up into the small intestines where they don't belong.
Mhm.
And then once they're there, they create all kinds of havoc. They give you all kinds of symptoms that, I've had like peripheral neuropathy in my feet. Well, once I healed SIBO, that all went away, but nobody was telling me it could be caused by bacteria in my gut,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? It could be ringing in your ears, all of a sudden goes away,
Mhm.
right? So way I find out, and lo and behold, guess what kind of diet you're supposed to eat for this?
Mhm. Meat. You were telling me.
You eat a carnivore diet,
Mhm.
because when you eat all these vegetables, specifically broccoli and cauliflower and all the things that we're told are really good for you, that feeds the SIBO.
Mhm.
You can't take probiotics because guess what? That feeds the SIBO. So everything I was doing was
Mhm.
making myself worse. And if I had asked my higher self, because I was so convinced
Mhm.
that I was doing the right thing, I
Yeah.
couldn't have heard that.
Yeah.
So you have to be really, really careful with this work. Just because you've heard your higher self say something to you in your inner ear,
Mhm.
unless it falls on you like a ton of bricks, it's probably not true.
Yeah. And it's really up to you being very open to hearing, you know, that type of conversation. Like if you're if you are so convinced that you're doing everything right, you're not going to be looking for another answer because you think you
Right,
already have your answer.
right.
So you're closed. You're not open to advice.
Right. And to tell you the truth, most of the time, if this happened to me 30 years ago and they've only even known about SIBO for the last few years and they didn't even know how to heal it, I am dependent on other people who are experts in their field
Mhm.
to tell me things that I can't figure out myself. Like
Mhm.
I'm always going to these health webinars because how else am I going to figure these things out?
Yeah.
I need other people who that's their expertise. My expertise is in emotional and spiritual healing. They need me
Yeah.
to tell them that, and I need them. And I put what? My heart and soul into this kind of work.
Mhm.
They put their heart and soul into another facet of reality creation, and I need them to have the expertise to tell me. The way I receive guidance is I receive it from several different places. So you can have a conversation with your higher self, being aware that you may not be hearing accurately. Your higher self may be telling you, but it's not going to get through
Mhm.
because you have this thing called a belief system in your way.
Yeah.
And so you tell your higher self, I am open to new information. Please send me to a book, to a webinar, to a person who can help open my mind to more.
Mhm.
And sometimes to a dream, because I used to have a lot of dreams that gave me information. And
Mhm.
when it comes through a night dream, you can be pretty sure that what you're hearing is true. So, receiving guidance is all about using all those modalities and bringing them together. And it's amazing. You'll get this gestalt that comes in your mind. It's like,
Mhm.
I know exactly what to do.
Yeah.
That's guidance. It's
Mhm.
not as simple as just saying, let's have a talk
Mhm. Yeah.
to your higher self. But when you do those kinds of meditations, going into your safe place, now you've gone to them over and over again, you see this beautiful place, you create the resonance of safety all around you, you see your higher self perhaps as beloved. I have meditations that I've done with people where I bring the beloved into the room, and it's like, the way I set it up with this beautiful music, and you see them enter the space and you see them across the way, and they're coming closer, and you feel this instant emotional attraction, right? Just like you would see someone that you adored, walking into the room, like love at first sight almost. And it's like, wow. And you come closer and closer and closer. And you reach out and your hands touch, You start that way and you set it up so that this incredible is creating the space
Mhm.
for this experience of love
Mhm.
to unfold. And then you come closer until they're holding you in your arms, in
Mhm.
their arms, you see, feeling the love, feeling the sensation of the body next to each other, feeling the chest rise and fall, using all of your senses to make it real.
Mhm.
Making it up, but making it real. And at a certain point, when your emotions are unleashed, you step in something that Lazarus calls the imaginal realm, which he says is the fifth dimension of reality. It's this place where miracles happen, where your emotions are easy to access, where you can experience love at a level you have never experienced before, where your soul has full voice, where your angels and guides are right there with you. And
Mhm.
it's like you cross a threshold and miracles are happening.
Mhm.
This is how we heal ourselves. And so before doing inner child rescue work, I would encourage you to create this relationship, to feel the love, to know the realness of your higher self. And then for me, when I do inner child rescue work, I don't do it too much anymore, but for me, when I started doing it, when I learned it from my hypnotherapy training, and then I started working with Lazarus, and he was giving me all these tools, and I thought, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this a part of my meditation routine. And I didn't do it every day, but every 2 or 3 days, do an inner child rescue work now. And
Mhm.
you start with what you remember, the abuses you remember, and everybody has memories.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, the people who were the most abused have the least memories because they couldn't handle it at the time. They left their body, so those memories are gone for them. But everybody has something that they can remember, and so you start with what you can remember, a memory that you have. And then you run a child rescue mission. You alter your state of consciousness. You visualize the memory that you had. You make it real. You feel the feelings. You feel the fear arising in you, or the, oh no, it's happening again. My dad's starting to do that thing again, or
Mhm.
whatever it is. You're starting to feel those feelings,
Mhm.
and once they come up, You never have to go much farther than it coming up.
Mm.
Then the adult self steps into that visualization and you run a rescue mission. And that's when your adult self and your abuser are facing it off.
Mm.
And you're telling that abuser in no uncertain terms, how dare you?
Mm.
You are not doing that to my child, not ever. And
Mm.
you're telling them off and you're telling them exactly what you think of them.
Mm.
And then watching them fade away and then doing the nurturing, the loving, the healing, and then some kind of a healing experience as you invite your angels and guides in. And once you've done this a few times, it's like this routine,
Mhm.
right? It's this process. And
Yeah.
it's all in my notes. I encourage everybody always to get my notes, print them out, have them with you. Make a notebook when I give these classes to people in my living room. That's what they do. They run them off, make a notebook, they go back over them. I've had people take these notes, sit with other people who are interested and teach the class, that
Mhm.
I've just taught them, and
Mhm.
they'd have discussions about it. This is how we get this information out into the world.
Yeah.
But if you have your higher self, you can go to your higher self in the beginning, sit in your safe place and tell your higher self, I want to do inner child rescue work related to my sexuality or related to this issue of self pity that I've got, or, whatever it is that you have, or this. I have such judgment on X, Y, and Z. I want to do inner child rescue work about that and where I got these ideas. And so you talk it over with your higher self as an imaginal process, and you ask your higher self, will you help guide me through this? So in my visualizations that I do myself, it's my higher self that's actually guiding me through the process. You allow your higher self to put you in this relaxed state, which is just usually a process of your body's relaxing, you're going deeper and deeper into an altered state. Perhaps you feel like you're floating on a cloud, these kinds of suggestions. And as you become more and more relaxed, there is a memory coming up into your subconscious mind, a memory of a time, of the first time or an important time when you first began to experience whatever your issue is.
Mm.
And then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, see that memory.
Mhm.
And perhaps you're in a room. This is another technique I used a lot. Perhaps you're in a room and the person, I'm so as the therapist, I'll be in with a client. They're in a room. It's like, well, it's dark in here. What do you see? It's dark in here.
Mhm.
It's like, well, find a light switch,
Yeah. Turn on the light.
and they'll feel around on the wall, wherever, and flick on the light switch. It's like, oh, there is a baby in this room.
Mm.
It's like something will come, something will come. So as a therapist, like, what the hell do I do with this? It's like
Mhm.
you're
Yeah.
trying to be really creative to figure this out right along with them.
Mhm.
And it's like, is this your child?
Mhm.
Oh, yes, it is. It's like,
Mhm.
can you go pick up that child? Yes, and then a memory will come back.
Mm.
It can come in all kinds of ways. This is the most creative, imaginative work on the planet. That's why I
Mm.
think you're really good at it, Yvette.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love like, this is pretty much what I always I've been always drawn to it too, and I feel like it's very healing, and for me, I feel like it's something that I can really connect to, and I can see myself, like because it takes a part of you that's imaginative and creative, but
Mhm.
also the part of you that wants to heal others, and you can
Right,
do that simultaneously.
exactly.
Mhm.
And it's interesting that as you do this work, so technically you are your inner child's parent,
Mm.
right? Authentic inner parent.
Yeah.
This is nothing more than a process of reparenting yourself.
Mm.
But only this time, you're the parent and you're the one who is learning what it means to
Mm.
be an authentic parent who doesn't tell you to shove your emotions down, to
Mhm.
go into your room and forget about it, to stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about, right? You're the one healing yourself.
Mhm.
And it's a learning experience for the both of you.
Yeah.
And of course, the more emotionally and spiritually mature you are, the more able you are to do this. Now, by the time I was doing this, I had 3 children of my own. Plus, I'd been an elementary school teacher for several years. I mean, I knew kids inside and out. All I can say is that this is the most important work you'll ever do. If you don't think you can do it by yourself, find an alchemical hypnotherapist to do it with you, and there's plenty of them around now.
Mhm.
And make this into a routine that you do frequently. And I would say take a year out of your life, because that's what I did. I did inner child rescue work every few days for a year. And this is what happened for me. And I can't say it'll happen for you, but for me, I started with the memories that I had. And then while I was rescuing the child, another memory would come up. And then the next time I did inner child rescue work, I went back to that other memory. And that's the memory I used and did an inner child rescue work around that. And that happened over and over and over and over again. I went back to a memory when I was an adolescent, and in those days, it wasn't like in your generation where everyone who was 18 years old, every female who was 18 years has already been having sex from the time they were 14.
Mhm.
I didn't know a whole lot about sex at that time. And there
Mhm.
wasn't internet. I never seen pornography. I had, it was a much more innocent time.
Mhm.
And in order to go to college, I had been accepted into a college and I needed to have pelvic exam.
Mhm.
Well, I'd never had a pelvic exam. I'd never had sex. I'd never even masturbated. I didn't know anything.
Mhm.
And so I went to that exam, and in those days, there was a male doctor who was doing it, and there had to be a nurse. There was a nurse standing right beside me. They didn't inform me about anything. The nurse didn't tell me what was going to happen. Nothing.
Mhm.
And so they're telling me to put my legs in these stirrups,
Yeah.
spread apart,
Mhm.
and I'm just doing what this authority figure tells me to. My throat chakra was completely closed. I
Mhm.
had no ability to
Mhm.
express any feelings that were going. I was just allowing it all to happen
Mhm.
without a voice.
Yeah.
And I got home from there, and afterwards it was all over. I was completely shut down. I had this non-nurturing mom I never shared anything with. And I forgot all about this event until I went back and did my inner child rescue work. And to me, that was a rape scenario.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, not technically, but that's the way I felt.
Yeah.
And I remember going home and sitting in the bathtub for hours and crying.
Mhm.
I had completely forgotten that. So these are the kinds of things that can come up for you
Mhm.
when you do this work. And so the more traumatized you were as a child, the more frequently you were abused, what tends to happen is you tend to leave your body. And so you don't remember those things.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
you can't remember them
Yeah.
because you have no way to handle what happened to you. And
Mhm.
so you forget, you move on. You
Mhm.
try to have a life as an adult, but then you keep attracting the wrong kind of partners. You have these reactions and you don't know why. If you haven't done any work on yourself, you can't express it. You have no voice.
Mhm.
You see what happens. It's horrendous.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a repeating cycle.
It's just a repeating cycle.
Mhm.
And so when you start doing the inner child rescue work, that's when you begin to remember. You bring it all back. You don't have to remember everything. You'll know when you're done doing inner child rescue work. Because when you think of that abuser, all you will do is feel sorry for them. You won't feel any charge.
Mhm.
It's just a memory,
Mhm.
something that happened to you a long time ago. Eventually, if you haven't done so already, you'll eventually come to forgiveness. They did the best they can, even though it sucked.
Mhm.
Right? It's really hard to think about a sexual abuser doing the best they can, but
Yeah. Yeah.
still true, and it'll just fade away as a memory. It's like, oh, I can call my mom, I can talk to her on the phone. We have a shallow relationship because can't talk to her about anything of great depth, but it's good. It's okay. I don't
Yeah.
want to drive all the way to Southern California to see her,
Yeah.
but it's okay. We have a good relationship, as good as can be expected under these kinds of circumstances. That my mom has never expressed any interest in spiritual or emotional growth. She's
Mhm.
not capable of it in this lifetime, and I have to accept that about her,
Yeah.
and it's okay.
Yeah, and
So,
that's with a lot of people, and, you kinda built up this, like, anger, like, I remember previous partners, and I would get so angry that they just did not understand me, and I'm like, "Why
mhm,
don't you understand? Like, I'm telling you exactly how it is," and it's almost like you're speaking a completely different language, and you
right,
feel just so separated from them, and I would get angry, and then I was like, "Why am I so angry?" I feel so detached from this person who I'm trying to have a connection with, and they just aren't on that vibrational level, and that's not that, that's nobody's fault. Like,
right,
I'm on a
mhm,
different page, they're on a different page, and that's how they are. There's nothing wrong with
mhm,
that. It's
right,
just not a person that I can be around if that's the case.
right, and especially not to have an intimate relationship
Right.
with.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
could have a friendly relationship, but you're not going to want to have an intimate
No.
relationship.
There's nothing to connect with, and
Hmm.
I was just kind of thinking about this recently where have you heard where what you crave most in a relationship is what you lacked in childhood with your parents? And
Hmm.
I noticed, like, with me especially, I crave deep communication
Right.
because, with my parents, I never really had deep conversations with them,
Hmm.
um, either they weren't capable of it or they didn't see the same way I did. And, I
Hmm.
was told a lot that, oh, like, why do you think so deeply? Like, oh, like, oh, you overthink, or oh, you're such a deep thinker, and almost like
Hmm.
it was a bad thing. So then it kind of
Right.
made me shut down, and with my partnership, I want to be with someone who makes me feel safe.
Right.
So, I'm like, I just crave this deep communication. If I cannot have a conversation with you about anything deep, I just can't have an intimate conversation, intimate connection at all.
Right. Hmm. That's why you and I connect so well,
Yeah.
because we're interested in the same things.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
this work, in my opinion, goes really deep.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it goes as deep as, however long your life is, the
Hmm.
beginning.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So I'd like to go back and talk about forgiveness and what it's really all about. So the Course in Miracles is very clear. It says forgiveness is seeing things differently.
Mhm.
So in conventional thinking, forgiveness is just about overlooking some of the bad things that somebody else did to you,
Mhm.
right? It's about overlooking, and you yourself, you're like God saying, "Okay, I'm going to overlook this
Yeah.
bad behavior."
Mhm.
But in truth, when you're doing it that way, you haven't done anything here.
Yeah.
You're not really over it. You're just speaking the words,
Mhm.
but you're not really, the charge isn't gone.
Yeah.
And so once you've done inner child rescue work, and then if you go on and continue to do shadow work,
Mhm.
I had to begin telling myself the truth about my mother, because everything that I judged my mother for, I did.
Mhm.
My mom was very judgmental. Well, I mean, I was judging my mom up the yin yang, right?
Mhm.
And my mom judged certain people that I didn't judge, but I judged other people,
Mhm.
right? I had to recognize that. I also, before I did my inner work, my shadow work, I realized that I created kind of oppositional relationships with people, and I was tactless and too honest and often hurt people's feelings. Well, my mom was always hurting my feelings,
Mhm.
right? I
Mhm.
had to start looking at all the ways that I was like my mom, which
Yeah.
is, at that time I didn't like her. I was very judgmental. I thought, oh my God. And then it was like, oh, I'm like my mom.
Mm. Yeah.
Not in the same form, but I had to look at how I was like my mom.
Mhm.
And then by the time I had done that, and of course I was doing other shadow work, and I mean, I've done a lot of deep inner work.
Mm,
It's like you really do get to the point and you realize, oh, I was courted to this person. I brought them in with me. I'm finishing unfinished business from the past
mm.
that I couldn't finish then. It's like, oh, wow, forgiving you is no
Yeah,
problem.
yeah,
That's forgiveness.
yeah. When you don't forgive somebody, you're hurting yourself more than if you just forgave them, and not to discredit what they did to you and not overlook what they did, but
Hmm.
forgive them and let go and understand, like you said, they're doing the best that they could with the
Right,
consciousness they
right.
had. Because in a way, it's easier than to resent them your whole life.
Well, that's an energy that is a burden to carry.
Yeah. Yeah, it burdens you.
But you're bringing up something good, and that is it's not that you don't hold people accountable.
Mhm,
So, for instance, if you're being sexually abused by your grandfather as a child, if
mhm.
you don't let people know about that, that grandfather's just going to you know, abuse the next and the next and the next.
Yeah.
You do have to hold people accountable. But
Mhm,
in the case of sexual abuse, that's really hard because maybe it's a favorite uncle that did it to you,
mhm. Yeah.
right? It's like you bring that up in your family and they want to just excommunicate you.
Mhm.
So, I mean, this is really, really complicated stuff.
Yeah.
But, and that's also a lesson that's probably coming to you from other lifetimes. If that's what's happening, if your family wants to deny you because of the abuse that one of the relatives did to you, well, think about all the cultures in which women are just, you can't even show your eyes, you're just all covered up,
Yeah.
where abuse is rampant. I
Mhm,
mean, all that has to be relived. All
mhm.
that has to be straightened out in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard, especially if you're coming from that culture where, like I mentioned before in this video, you grew up with it, that you don't know what to compare it to, you just think that
Hmm.
that's what it is, and it becomes difficult to understand that, "No, this is wrong," and it's even more impossible to stand up to it when everybody else around you is okay with it and just
Or
letting it.
in total denial.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's totally true. So anyway, that's my class on the inner child and adolescent, and I hope you can see why this is so important.
Mhm. Yeah. No, it is very, very important to just forgive people and just to move on from traumas that are triggering you in everyday life,
Hmm.
triggering you with things that are very small. Like you can get so angry over small things that, people are looking at you like, why are you, like
Hmm.
just they just want to touch you, or they just put your arm on your shoulder, and I know people who have been sexually abused, like, they'll freak out, or,
Right.
they have PTSD from that, and,
Right. Hmm.
that's gonna affect their everyday life until they move on from that trauma.
That's right. And not only that, back to that whole ACEs thing I was telling you about, the
Mm,
adverse events in childhood, they're going to make you sick.
yeah,
All
physical.
that stuff, that energy has to be expressed. It's an energy. We're energy beings. It's
Mm,
all we are. This physical plane is a hologram. It gives physical form to our invisible spiritual energy.
mm.
And if that energy isn't expressed out your mouth,
It holds in your body.
it will be expressed in your body as a disease. So it's important. Mm.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
want to save your life, if you want to evolve yourself spiritually,
Mm,
if you want to heal these dark emotions and not carry them around anymore, this work is imperative to do. And I personally don't know any other way to do it.
mm,
There's some people that do something called EMDR, which is I something desensitization, the reprocessing.
mm,
So where you're just looking at this thing going back and forth, and I've done that myself, and I don't think it is anywhere near as effective as inner child rescue work. But do what you can. If you can find alchemical hypnotherapists, do that. If you can't, just try to do it yourself.
yeah. And there's so many sources out there now. Like YouTube is a great source. There's probably alchemic hypnotherapists on YouTube that talk about this stuff.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, and, I've even done it with people over Zoom.
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay.
All
Mm,
right. So that will be the end of our class today, and the next class will be on past.
past lives. Past lives goes right into this because you heal past life personality in similar ways.
Well, I am looking forward to it.
Okay, cool. See you
Cool.
in a couple weeks.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you for watching.